Well, good morning. Welcome to this edition of the Presence Posse. Today we are talking about presence and being of service, and we're going to explore several different aspects of how inviting the power of presence into our lives can not only help us embrace this idea that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, but also can help us in one of the most powerful tools that we've got to really motivate ourselves, and that is of being service to others. Joining me today, I've got personal peace practitioner Jan Hart. And Jan, give me a little bit of your thoughts on this idea of presence and being of service.
Excuse me. Yeah, I guess this topic came up for a number of reasons, Bobby. One thing that occurred to me was that all of us in the posse are in the business of being of service to other people in one shape or another.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of the people that listen to us are also people that are of service to others in the world. Um, so that was one thing, and a bigger reason, I guess, would be that in my own practice, I know and have really come to see that the more present I am when I'm with somebody, being of service or not, the greater the connection.
Mm.
It's easier to get the other person's world and calibrate with what's going on with them. And it's more impactful. And the communication happens at a different level.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I guess there's the listening piece and there's the other side of the coin. And this is presence for me is tied up in deep listening. And there are so many ways that we can listen, but when we're present is when we're really listening, I find. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we're think we're listening, but we're just waiting for the other person to be quiet so we can have our say. We're being polite. We're not really listening. Other times, something has occurred to us while the other person is speaking, and we're trying to remember it and not forget it. Um,
And
but it goes
formulate
on
the
to,
excellent points that we're about to make.
yeah, yeah. So we're not listening. Sometimes we're evaluating or critiquing, what we think we're hearing. So that's not really listening. And sometimes we're really attentively listening. And, Mavis Karn talks a lot about this, and I love Mavis. Um, and she says that, that's how we're taught to listen in school: sit up and be attentive and take notes and, bear down and, really do your best here. Be focused and alert, but, very busy. So again, you're not really listening at a deep level. And I find that when I want to be of real service and, my state of mind is one of a quiet, settled mind where I am fully present, then I can listen from that deeper place. Can listen from a place of wisdom and a place of openness and receptivity. And what what I receive when I'm in that state is very different to what I hear when I'm not.
Yeah,
We receive what's not being said. We
yeah,
receive the emotional energy or frequency of what's going on. And that's what allows that connection. And, when we feel the connection as the person that's in service, the other person feels it too. And that allows for safety, vulnerability, and a true opening up.
yeah. That to me, in particularly in the coaching profession, that's an essential skill. But just in everyday life, most of the time when we ask somebody how are they doing and they respond back to us, that's very often just a reflexive interaction. It's just something that we say, that we've been conditioned to say when we see somebody that we haven't seen in a while. Often, people are barely listening to the question, and the person who asked the question are barely listening to the answer. And when something is going on, or if you just even interrupt that pattern, if you saw somebody that is either doing extremely well or may seem like they're a little bit off, and you pause and actually notice that, and with genuine curiosity say, wow, you look really on top of the world today, or the opposite of that, you don't quite look yourself today, and then say what's going on and pause and listen, it's a completely different interaction with somebody else, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Or if you stop and say, no, really, how are you?
Yeah.
They go, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another little pattern interrupt. And, our subconscious mind has got all of these unconscious patterns that we just do habitually. And it's a wonderful gift. It allows us to automate many of the processes that we go through routinely without even have to think about it. And it is really a cool phenomenon. However, it does also have the dark side of living too much of our lives on autopilot. And exactly what you just said, if somebody says, I'm doing okay, and you just say to them, no, really, how are you doing? And that in and of itself is such a, it just seems to break open this, protective bubble that a lot of us tend to walk through, particularly if there's something that's going on, that we feel the need to protect ourselves emotionally.
Yeah. It's interesting when, a long time ago when I worked for big businesses and I was a leader in an organization, I had somebody say to me one time, you're so present with us as a team. You're the only manager I ever had who welcomes me every morning, and who I feel with me throughout the day, and who says thank you to me and goodbye in the evening when I go home. And I thought that was a very sad reflection on the world.
Yeah.
If it's a rarity, but people are moving so fast and furiously, physically, mentally. Um, being present is a rare thing in the world, and it's rare for a lot of people in their lives, and it can make such a beautiful difference. I
Yeah.
mean, even in day-to-day interactions, being of service to your family and, being present for them and really listening to what they have to say. Um, we hear different things and we end up with different relationships. Um, and the opposite to that is people are interacting and the other one keeps saying, no, that's not what I mean. No, you didn't hear me.
Right.
No, you're not
Right. Right.
listening. Um, because we're not really listening. We're just taking a snippet or what we think it is and moving on to the next item on the agenda, whatever that is
Yeah.
in our life.
And just robotically spewing out these scripts that we've memorized of the things that you're supposed to say in a certain situation, and just coming off of that, one of the things that I find is when I do that with intention, and if I'm calm enough and relaxed enough before I go into a meeting, which is most of the time, but not always. Sometimes my conditioning takes over as well. But if I get present and have that as my first intention, that I make a deep, meaningful, powerful connection with that person, it immediately separates you from the robotic interaction that
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
and their brain just goes, oh, wow, this is different. What's going on here? Which brings them present as well. And I was a manager in a big corporation as well at one time. And I would meet with all of my folks every quarter, and they were quarterly meetings, but they were performance reviews and that type of
Yeah.
stuff. And many people humorously called them our quarterly beatings. And because the way that they were typically conducted, you'd spend about 3 or 4 minutes. Most managers would spend about 3 or 4 minutes of things that you're doing really well. And then, 90% of the time together on here's what I need you to really focus on, and here's what I need you to be doing better. And the manager has his programmed introduction, and the financial advisor in that case had his programmed response, and nothing really gets said or done, and commitments aren't making. And I remember one
Yeah.
thing I used to
Yeah.
do was to say, we're going to have this meeting, and we're going to do this stuff. But before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about how are you doing? How do you feel about what's going on? How do you feel about how I'm supporting you in the work that I do? Technically, on the hierarchy chart, I was the boss, but I really still felt like I was a resource the same way I had been as a resource to my advisor
Yeah.
clients. Now I just had these, 55 advisors who were reporting to me,
Yeah.
and they were my clients now. So I
Yeah.
wanted to see how am I doing as a,
Hmm.
a performance coach and
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
who's designed to get things out of the way. And oftentimes in those meetings, we would never get, or we would say, the last 3 minutes might be the stuff that we typically would spend an hour on, but it
Yeah.
was really more about
Yeah.
making a deep connection. And I had that too when I left. I was a manager for about 15 years at Bank of America, and then I left in 2003 to form my own sales training and coaching company. And most of my clients were former employees. And a lot
Okay.
of the stuff that I talked with them about in the initial meetings, I I was like, why didn't we talk about this when I was on your payroll and the company was paying for it? Now you're paying for me out of my pocket. And the response that I got back from a few of them was, well, you were the boss back then. And so I had to have my suit of armor. I didn't want you to see any kinks in the chain or, any
Yeah.
flaws in the process or anything. So I was holding up this facade, but here's some things that I really need to work on.
Work on. Yeah.
And
It's very
I'm,
common, Bobby. Yeah, but what you're describing is the difference between an old-fashioned taskmaster and a servant leader.
yeah,
That way of managing and leading is just doesn't work. Um, and what that employee felt. I mean, you helped him as much as he was able to open up in that workplace. And I've had a similar experience that people will share more with me as an external coach in an organization than they ever did when I was the HR director. Because the last company that I worked for before going out on my own, hired me back as a consultant to continue coaching the leaders. And suddenly they were opening up with all sorts of information that I hadn't come across before. Like,
yeah,
from working with them that there's more there. You pick up on that, but unless they're willing to share.
yeah,
But people don't always feel safe or to speak up about what they feel might be a weakness or a vulnerable point. And a lot of people are afraid that it'll be a career breaker. But anyway, that's a discussion for another day.
It is, I guess, a
Yeah,
discussion for another day.
yeah,
But and there are enough people that are out there. Some of our conditioning. I heard somebody say something the other day. Uh, Results don't care about your feelings, which and it was, I think, a kind of a bit of a sophisticated way of saying, shut up, quit complaining, and just get it done. I don't want to hear excuses. And, particularly from a management standpoint, but really any interpersonal interaction at all, that,
yeah.
just kind of, I heard it and I'm like, oh no, gosh.
No, no. But
It was, go ahead.
that kind of points to a concept, the health of the helper. A lot of leaders and managers in organizations, all the way up, from frontline to the C-suite, are so busy-minded themselves and so caught up in the hamster wheel that they're on that they're not of much help to the people beneath them. Um, and people sense that.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the focus on the negatives and the redirection and what has to change and improve, and we'll skim over the good stuff.
Yeah.
There's no time for building relationships. Too much to be done. Lots to do, lots to achieve, and it's just ticking boxes along the way for a lot of people. And if people could be more present, leaders included, uh, my assertion is they'd be of a lot more service to the organizations and the people that they serve. Uh, because I think when people feel cared about by leaders in an organization, that's when you get the thing they call engagement,
Yeah.
where people willingly give everything they have to give. Um,
I have a friend who's a management consultant, and he has a phrase that he says that you can buy people's hands and backs, but you have to win and earn their hearts. And once you do, that changes the game pretty much with everything. I want to explore another thing that popped up to me with this subject, this
mhm,
idea of being of service. And that is, I don't remember who said this, but I remember reading an article a while back by, I think it was a psychologist, might have been kind of a performance coach. I'm not exactly sure.
okay.
But they suggested when you're personally feeling down and out, that one of the best things that you can do to get yourself out of that funk is going and being of service to others. Find somebody who's even worse off than you, or it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be somebody who's worse off than you,
yeah,
but just find something that you can do to contribute to somebody else's good feeling. And in doing so, you're going to stop looking at the world through such a personally identified pair of goggles. And you're going to stop overly taking things personal, and
yeah.
kind of get out of your head and into your heart a little bit more. What's your experience with your HR background or your coaching background now, that where you've seen that come into play?
I would 100% agree with that. In my own personal experience, and even in my family and social circle, not to mind business. I can't explain it. I don't know what it is that happens, but when when we give of ourselves and open up our heart to do a kindness or show compassion or support to another human being, it touches us as much as it does them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that connection, when we take the time to make the
Yeah.
connection, it's a two-way street. And so much of the stuff that we do is in what we are communicating is not just the words that we say. I mean, you can see that if you've ever gotten into a fight with somebody on a text message or IMs or comments on Facebook or
Yeah.
whatever, when you're only reading words and you are, as you're reading those words, feelings are coming up. And we very often tend to generalize that reading these words is making me mad. Therefore, the author of these words must
Yeah.
have been mad when they wrote them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, we're cut off from all of that. And that those nonverbals, once you get used to kind of looking for them, you can see people. I would notice that in those talks that I was mentioning earlier, that as soon as I said, we're going to talk about this, we're going to perform this play that we both conditioned to perform, me as the supervisor, you as the direct report, but we're not going to do that yet. So don't feel the need to put your guards up, and let's just have a little conversation here. And I actually learned that. I was a financial advisor for a lot of years. So I was selling financial plans. That was kind of my job. And people
Well,
would come into the meetings, and I would do the same thing here. I would have like a stack of resources that I may be giving them that I was planning on giving them when they would leave. And I would just physically move that to the side and say, we've got a lot to talk about. But before we do that, let's just check in with each other. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks or 3 months maybe. How
yeah.
are things going for you? What's going on in your life? And you can see people just it's almost, not almost, I think it is physically witnessing them letting their guard
Ah,
down.
yeah. It's
And you just
palpable.
go,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh, I can relax for a minute.
yeah, yeah. Don't have to have my shields on full
Yeah. Yeah.
just yet.
Shoulders drop even.
Yeah, it's a big difference, and the communication suddenly goes. And I shared this story on a previous podcast of going back to Florida and being with my brother,
Yeah.
who was sharing some very technical stuff, and he was just venting. And I noticed in myself that I was starting to get uncomfortable. And that just gave me a pause to go, why is this upsetting to you? It doesn't have anything to do with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And kind of the answer that I got back is, I don't have the answers to his problems. And as soon as I said that, I'm like, he knows that. You don't need that. And I relaxed. And it was kind of almost like the two of us were standing there talking, and I kind of stepped out of myself a little bit and just noticed what was going on. And I said, here's two brothers who love each other having a conversation in person, which we hadn't had for a couple of years, because I don't get back there all that often. And the moment that I did that, it was like he had been emphatic and that dropped down. I had been defensive and that dropped away. And then in a very short period of time, it was just kind of like my brother ended it. He just said, well, that's enough of that. We don't need to
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm kind of beating a dead
Yeah.
horse here. And then we were off doing something that was
Yeah.
fun, but
Yeah.
it was being present in that moment that allowed me to realize I'm having a weird, and it was uncomfortable reaction. It wasn't strong, but it just seemed enough out of place that I'm like, okay, if I take a breath, he probably will too. And that's exactly
Yeah.
what happened.
I love that story, and it's something I often find in coaching, training, just being with other people. Oftentimes, when people have some sort of a challenge or an issue that's on their mind, or there's some level of preoccupation with, their their thinking, is it because of this, that, the other, and out in the future, where X, Y, or Z might happen, and making all these assumptions and thinking of all these theories, and it's endless. It could go on for a long time with somebody. Um, and I often find that just asking, what if none of that were the case? Again, it's just an
Hmm.
interrupt. And people kind of just go, almost startled sometimes. Like, what do you mean? It's not any of those. And just taking a bit of time to just sit with yourself and, go to that balcony and have a look at what's going on inside your head. And you
Yeah.
actually see
Another
then.
another good way of asking that is without that story, without the need to tell that story or add to that story, how are you really feeling about all of this? Just
Yeah,
a different way to look at it, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. And then we can direct the conversation in how they would like to feel, and, how to create that.
I had a another interesting experience at lunch recently that
Mm.
somebody was sharing something with me that I had just been through. This was not a coaching. This was just
Okay.
with a friend, and I mean, it can, the same thing happens with a friend, but kind of one of the hazards of being a coach, particularly if you're the type of coach that is supposed to have all the answers. Um, you get that listening block of trying to say, okay, I'm hearing what she's saying. How do I respond to this? Step one, step two, step three. And then, I'm not really listening because I'm busy
Evaluating.
crafting a response in my head. And I jumped in with her and started to offer advice. And she just said, she held her hand up, nice pattern interrupt, and said, I don't need you to activate your savior archetype right now. I need you to listen. And and that was recent. So for me, like doing as much of this stuff, I'm like, wow, that conditioning is so deep, and that is deep in me. That's I'm
Me
working
too,
on the
Bobby.
unwinding.
Yeah, one of my ongoing practices is to keep noticing that when I'm offering advice that wasn't asked for, or drawing conclusions that may not necessarily be there. But what I have found can be helpful when with other people, again, it doesn't matter who or in what context, um, just sitting in silence. And I often notice that the longer I can just be quiet and listen, the more whatever is going on gets solved by the person in front of me. And,
Hmm.
I think that's really important. That, like, one of the things that attracted me to coaching was coaches don't have any of the answers, the clients have all the answers. And that helps me in being present when I'm with people, because I'm not looking for the solutions, because that's not my job, except when my conditioning kicks in, and it is my job, which is regularly. um, but, and again, that's back to the health of the helper. Like, if I have no expectation that I have an answer, or that there even needs to be a solution for this person, if I'm just there to be present and be of service, then that in itself seems to have some magic to it. It's not like you don't, ask questions or engage with the person, but people have their own answers if they quiet down enough. And oftentimes, my experience is that they just have to do the venting and the talking and the processing out loud and get all those thoughts out of their head and spoken, and then they can quiet down if there's nothing
Yeah.
coming back. If I'm still sitting there saying nothing, then they quieten down and eventually start talking again. And oftentimes with, well, solutions or a direction to look in or a next step to take. They have their own insights when they're present,
Yeah.
which I love. I mean, it's like magic watching it happen every time. It's just amazing.
Well, that's kind of that what you just elegantly stated is the opposite of all of the conditioning. I'm getting close to Medicare in the United States, and I clicked on an ad, and now I'm seeing all kinds of, the 17 secrets about Medicare you didn't know about, and the complete Medicare solution. And we seem to live, and people even often describe what they do as I provide solutions for people that are solving or facing such and such a problem. It seems like we're supposed to have all of those answers, and sometimes we do, or sometimes the answer for us is just asking the right question to help them get in touch
Yeah.
with their resources. And there's an enormous freedom of realizing you don't have to have the answer. It's enough to just be with somebody and connect and love and support. I don't want to make it sound too lovey-dovey, but
No.
but it can be. I mean, there's nothing against it being that.
No.
And just letting people process whatever it is that they're processing and go through it in a loving environment. This is getting to be like
Yeah, but it is. It is. It's like offering that safe, loving environment. And if that's what people experience, then they're not feeling judgment, so the barriers don't go up. And if they can keep their barriers down, their own wisdom kicks in.
Yeah.
And I think when we see the psychological innocence in what's going on for people and don't engage with them at that level, but be present enough to speak to the person behind the mask, as I think Keith Blevins says. And when we speak and listen at that level, it's different. And that's not providing solutions, that's providing a safe space for transformation.
Yeah, and a connection, and
All
I think this was a hard lesson for me to learn. My independent conditioning and do it yourself and don't be weak, that was very, very strong in me, and it took me quite a while to realize how much love and support and connection was available merely for the asking. And oftentimes you don't even need to ask, you just need to make other people aware, and they're volunteering to come and connect and be of service. And it's a very different way to go through the human experience, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I have the same thing going on. I mean, my dad died when I was 10, and my mom went back to work because she had to. And I became very self-reliant at a very young age. And that pattern really became ingrained. It's up to me. If I want something to happen, it's up to me. It's nothing got to do with anybody else. And people used to say, no man is an island. And I go, oh yeah, we're all islands. I didn't get that for a lot of years. But it's a whole different way of living to accept and receive and invite support, and to be able to give it and provide it to others as well. It's just such a beautiful way to live. And as you say, people are there at the ready, almost waiting to hear from you, delighted to jump in. And we don't realize the support that we have available to us. And on a deeper level, Bobby, until recent years, I thought it being up to me was being up to this physical body and filing cabinet. I thought I was on my own in this container.
Yeah.
I didn't realize what I was connected to or part of or what was in me. And that's changed everything. Because you're never on your own when you realize, you're a child of the universe.
And to finish that statement, you're never on your own when you realize you're never on your own. And it truly is just that realization. Although we're battling against this conditioning all the time, which is it's a fascinating exploration once we start to make it and to see how much of what we do is I still, like, just now I'm 64 years old,
Mhm.
and I'm just now getting through the idea that I don't have to finish everything that's on my plate. And the idea, order anything you want, just eat everything that you order. I must have started getting indoctrinated into that shortly after I could speak, because
Yeah. Yeah.
it's one of the last ones to go. And just seeing how much of the stuff we are turning over to mindless processes, which again, those are powerful things. Being able to integrate things into unconscious behaviors that we can do is an absolutely wonderful gift. And it has some downsides as well if you don't stop and say, hey, is this even serving me anymore? This is the way I do things because it's the way I've been doing things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is this the best way? Can I deconstruct the process and see if it still makes sense? Perhaps add another effectiveness layer and then move on to something else. And of course,
Yeah.
for us, that's bringing presence into our lives more frequently.
And that's another, beautiful aspect of presence and being of service is that, we give the gift of presence to the people that we're with. And some people haven't experienced that before. I know I didn't. I wasn't around people that were present most of my life. And it is a gift and a real eye opener and a gift that keeps on giving and just goes deeper and deeper. Um, So, my God, I mean, there's so many ways. I mean, really, presence is being. You say being of service. If you're being and you're with other people, then I think you are being of service.
Okay, I do want to talk about a different issue. Miriam is not with us today. She's in a class, but she did text us in this idea that sometimes people are attempting to be of service because that's an identity, the helper archetype, and they're doing things merely for the idea of feeding their ego, which isn't in and of itself bad, although there is a deeper level that we could explore. Any thoughts around Miriam's idea here?
Yeah, being of service as an ego feeder. Well, I think, yeah, like you say, there is that aspect to it, and that in and of itself isn't necessarily bad, depending on the
Yeah.
context. Um, I think when people are just trying to do the right thing, that can be a good intention, but it's not necessarily being of service. What we spoke about earlier, trying to give people solutions and advice and thinking we have all the answers, and I get caught up in that too. That can be feeding the ego in some respect. Oh, I cracked that one, or
Yeah.
um, so yeah, that can happen. However, Well, I guess it could also happen that you would be being of service to feed your ego, and you could also be present, and maybe some good could come out of it.
Yeah, I just think it's a good idea to kind of explore our
Come
intentions.
from.
Yeah, and what is our motivation here? And I like the idea of thinking about. I think it's A Course in Miracles that say we're always either showing up as an expression of love or seeking love, and that could be true of everything, but certainly is true of being in service. Are you in this moment? Are you doing this just to reinforce this facade, this identity that you've created of yourself, that you are a helper type person? Or we could even maybe say, and are you fully present and really seeing what you're doing here, giving of yourself freely as an expression? And if you're not, can you take a quick pause and maybe reconnect on the inside and just shift perspective a little bit?
Yeah, I love that because I was going to say if it's somebody whose identity is caught up and their ego is caught up in being a helper or a carer or being of service, then they'll have all these unconscious conditioned patterns running what's going on anyway, and they might not even be aware that that's what's happening. So, as you say, we take a pause, take a step back and reflect, maybe we can see that. Because a lot of this work is about bringing to the fore what's going on in the
Yeah,
background.
and all of it, or well, not all of
Yeah,
it, but yeah,
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
And it's a never ending process for me anyway. It's a lot of conditioning going on. Like you, I'm 63, so I spent, the vast majority of my life being run by my conditioning and my programs, and it's not going to get undone in an instant. Gets undone via insight and reflection,
Yeah. And
quiet.
that's what really this coaching is all about, the way that you and I practice it. It's not so much about having the answers, but really creating a context, an environment whereby people can get in touch enough with themselves. And so often, when you see somebody who is really down and out and really going through some stuff, perhaps a cancer diagnosis that's terminal, or being the spouse of somebody who's gotten a cancer diagnosis that's terminal, or a bad breakup, or it could be
Yeah,
lots and lots of other
anything.
things. Sometimes just being there and being fully present and giving people permission to let their guard down and to be able to see that it's going to be okay. You don't have to be strong right now. It's okay. And in my work, particularly when I'm practicing hypnotherapy, we're getting into some deep stuff, and there's often uh, tears of joy or
Yeah,
tears of sweet release that are being processed. And it's interesting. Sometimes when I'm doing my initial client setup, I'll tell them that that's a common thing, and you'll notice that I've got lots of boxes of Kleenex all over my office. They're
yeah,
always within easy reach, and sometimes just creating that context where if it comes up, that's okay too. And anything that you need to do here
yeah.
to
It's
get
all
more
okay.
grounded and aligned,
Yeah,
and to stop the play of conditioning that's running so much of our lives,
yeah.
to get it to just go offline for a little bit so you can really process. And
Now, I think it's so important that people feel that they're welcome, that everything that they bring is welcome, good, bad, ugly. There's nothing taboo, there's nothing off the table. All experiences are beautiful because they're a human experience. And again, it's the conditioning, pain is bad, pleasure is good. We've dissected this stuff and made it so binary that it's out of the whole.
Yeah.
Whereas if we can open ourselves to allow all experiences, you know, it's an easier and more graceful experience of life that we get as a result. We navigate differently. We understand what our feelings are telling us. That the way you're using the gift of thought right now feels like this. Is this how you want to feel? Not that you can flick a switch, but just the understanding alone softens and takes the sting out of it.
Yeah, and you can use the computer analogy. The amount of bandwidth that we use, the mental bandwidth that we use, resisting the things that we have labeled as bad, and assisting or manifesting the things that we have been conditioned to believe are good, is an enormous amount of mental bandwidth. And we'll probably always have preferences. I haven't eaten anything yet today, but when I settle down after this, I'll make a decision about what I'm going to eat, and it'll just be whatever strikes me in that moment as what I want to do next. And if I'm not sitting there counting calories and doing all of that other stuff and analyzing everything about the meal that I'm about to have to see if it's the optimal fuel for peak performance, when we let some of that stuff go, our bodies kind of know, and they'll lead us in that direction. Nothing wrong with those studies, of course, but
body has great wisdom. Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going, like, you're touching on intentions there again, and I think that it's so important. And I know one of my own practices on a daily basis is to sit in the morning and get present and align myself with what it is I want to be a beacon for that day. Whether that's presence or compassion or playfulness or whatever it is. But if I'm going out for a day of coaching or being with other people and being of service, then slowing down, taking the time first thing in the morning to align myself with that state of being tends to set the day up in the direction that I want it to go. And the days tend to go a lot more smoothly than a day when I don't do that. And I think intention and aligning yourself with your intentions is a very important practice as well. But we need to be present to do that too.
Yeah. And just somehow conditioning ourselves to stop and take a pause. And I actually like the idea of setting the intentions more frequently than just once a day. You can do that every time you shift from one activity to another. If you're working and you're buying into this idea of power blocks, which I think is a good idea to buy into, have an intense period of direct focus. Once you start a new block, it's a great idea to just say, okay, so for the next 45 minutes, I'm going to be focusing on this article. What's my intention here? How aligned is my current emotional state to have me achieve that intention? And am I overly concerned about just knocking this off of my list? Not to criticize efficiency at all, but very often as we're doing something, something else will pop up. And, can we be open to those ideas? Or are we myopically putting blinders on and just saying, I'm going to focus on nothing but this for the next 45 minutes?
Yeah. I actually think we're more efficient when we're present. We just do it once. And not to come back to it. But so I mean, there's all sorts of aspects to presence and being of service. Before, during, and after. um,
Yeah.
and that's another practice is, at the end of the day to kind of reflect back and say, well, where was I present? And
Yeah.
where was I really being of service? And, what played into that? And
I like
just,
asking to kind of before and after.
yeah,
Uh, what do I need to do? Where do I need to be? What do I need to be pursuing that this activity can be fun? And I do that mainly with the ones that I don't intuitively perceive as fun. Some things I'm just driven to do, and
yeah,
I can do those things effortlessly. There's other things that I have a little bit more of a resistant relationship to them right now. And I like to peel those apart and go, all right, I'm going to do my taxes, which I hate doing.
mhm,
How can I do that and be, make that be at least a little bit more of an enjoyable activity, and do that on review as well to say, that was great. I accomplished this.
yeah,
What can I
yeah,
do next time that would make that even more fun or
yeah,
even more rewarding or a little bit
brilliant.
quicker without getting super tied down to
Yeah,
having to optimize every little, we can optimize ourselves to
to death.
into AI pretty
You
much.
could, you could, if you so wished. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, they're all great practices. Yeah, we're coming to the end or the top of the hour again. The
we are indeed. Anything that you would like to
Yeah,
share with the group in terms of what you've got going on or how they can find you or if they're interested in a
yeah. I don't
next
quite have
step?
anything yet. I'm in the process of setting up a local meetup group for around the personal peace.
Oh, wow.
Excuse me, and obviously presence is a big part of that, but I'm waiting on confirmation on a location. But that would be for only local listeners anyway. So, other than that, it's the beginning of the year. I do have some coaching slots available, and I can be found on Facebook, Jan Hart, and you can message me if you would like to chat. And even if people aren't interested in coaching, if there's anyone that would like to explore what we've been chatting about today, I always love having chats. So feel free to get in touch. How about you, Bobby?
Awesome. Well, I do have something coming up here in the not too distant future. I'm releasing a program that I'm currently have named as RPM, which is our relationship with the present moment.
Beautiful.
And it is specifically designed to give people some ideas and some tools to just explore the role that the hypnosis of social conditioning plays in each of our lives. And as I've been introduced to these concepts through the three principles movement and through non-duality and just other studies that I'm doing, I was stunned to really learn what a conditioned robot I had been living my life as. And, maybe I'm off the charts, but it doesn't seem that way when I start working with other folks that are doing that. So this is going to be a short course. There will be some actual interaction, but I'm really creating it more as a self-guided teaching for
Okay.
us to just explore what's going on in our personal life. If you're interested in that, the first place that will have access to it is a group that I run on Facebook called Our Mindful Life. I'm in the process of opening a foundation, although getting my charitable status with the
Status.
Internal Revenue Service is proving quite an interesting task for me. But that is the online home, the Facebook home for that, and I've got a program in there right now called Spring into Mindfulness, which is some ideas around inviting more presence into our lives and some tools to help you get back on track if you had been living in the present, but now with whatever's going on, feel yourself a little distracted. And RPM, I think, is going to take this to a much deeper and more profound and useful level. And that's going to be out in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. I look forward to that.
Soon, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll be one of the first to know about it, and I'm
Brilliant.
sure I'll be talking about it.
And I can recommend Our Mindful Life. I've been through a lot of the lessons, I won't say all, and they're all fabulous. And there's some gorgeous meditations in there as well, guided meditations that are quite deep. Or I found them quite deep anyway, yeah. And what's the word you use for them?
For the meditations?
Yes.
I call them source awareness meditations.
Meditations, okay.
And I've got a couple of other things that I do too. I have a protocol I call contemplative trance, which is different. That's a hypnosis, a guided hypnosis experience to really look at a problem from lots of different angles and perspectives. And it's shifting awareness and shifting perspectives in a way that we can look at a problem differently. Source awareness meditation is really, I love that saying from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, that we are not human beings that have occasional spiritual experiences. Rather, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And people who are in any sort of a spiritual tradition or religious tradition, odds are good they've heard that phrase, but for most it's just a nice idea. Some people explore it a little bit more deeply and they kind of get an intellectual understanding. The idea of those meditations that you were kind enough to bring up is about giving people the somatic experience, the embodied understanding, a gnosis of what's going on there. If you're familiar with the book Stranger in a Strange Land, he invented a term called grokking. It's really for you to be able to grok that understanding and to at least always have access to looking at the world through that perspective, giving you the choice that, we live a lot of our lives like as though this mind and this body is all we are, and we're very identified with that. And that's a fun way to live life a lot of the time. And having access to shifting that perspective and kind of zooming out, exactly what I did when I was describing that conversation with my brother, zoom out to a different perspective and go, what's really going on here? It creates a lot of room for insight and intuition and aha moments to come flashing in like a lightning bolt. And
yes, it does. The word I was trying to think of earlier was trippy. Some of those meditations are quite trippy.
Yes, they are. I occasionally at the spiritual center that I go to have like a psychedelic night where I'll be teaching people some very intense breathing techniques combined with some very trippy hypnotic guidance. And people who I don't do a lot of psychedelics. I've just explored once or twice and didn't really find that it was what I wanted. And but people who do that a lot say, man, I can get just with some of the breathing techniques that you're doing. I can have a great drug trip that I can wake up from on purpose and by design, Wow. So yeah, that's
no
the
bad
idea
tricks
there.
to Bobby, huh?
Yeah,
that's
cool.
very funny. Yeah, I don't know anything about that really, but Yeah.
maybe we'll have
You'll have to give us a demo of that sometime.
maybe so. That'd be fun.
Uh,
Well, yeah.
very
So
good.
thanks for making the time, Jan. I always love
Yeah, my
when
pleasure.
we're on here. It's kind of cool, just the two of
Yeah,
us. This time we get a little bit deeper with each other, which
yeah,
is
that's fun.
nice. And for everybody that's tuning in, thank you very much.
Yes,
Whether you're
thank you,
watching us
everybody.
live or in the rebroadcast, to tune in for the Presence Posse. We'll be back next week with
Yes, we
a
will.
brand new subject. And at our new time, we are 1 hour earlier now, specifically to help Jan and Miriam kind of not be doing this in the middle of their night. And so we'll see you next week at the new time, same channel. Thank you guys very much
Brilliant.
for tuning in. We'll talk to you
Listening.
next
Yeah.
time. Bye bye for
Thank you,
now.
everybody. See you next time.
Bye bye for now.
Bye.